Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Simon Beardsley from Lincolnshire Chamber of Commerce, and a very warm welcome to this ChamberConnect webinar. I'm here as your host for the session today, which is once again a really practical one that's going to focus on COVID-19 measures in the workplace today. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for connecting virtually today. Our ChamberConnect series have replaced our normal face-to-face events at this time, and we feel that they've become a really important tool to connect and inform. I'd like to make you aware that today's webinar is being recorded and it will be available to rerun via our website shortly, but also there'll be a link sent to you after today's session that will direct you straight to it as well. Before we move on to the main part of the webinar, I'd just like to make you aware of a new innovation that Lincolnshire Chamber members have suggested to us and we're delighted to be supporting. It's our HR support forum where Chamber members have come together to offer free or discounted HR advice and support. It can be accessed by our coronavirus hub on our website or via our homepage on our website, which will link directly to it as well. Information at this time continues to be vitally important, and I've mentioned before our coronavirus hub. If you go to www.links-chamber.co.uk, you'll find information there, but also don't forget to follow us on our Facebook site or on LinkedIn to make sure you get the latest notifications of changes and updates as well. The results of feedback is why we're here this afternoon, and it's led to an introduction of a series of webinars that we're calling ChamberConnect. And these are very much meant to be interactive sessions, and there will be a chance later on for you to ask questions, and we certainly invite and hope that you will do so. So how does the session work? Well, in a second, I'm going to introduce you to Chris Owen from Optimum Safety Management. Chris will talk us through the current COVID-related safety issues, identify some best practices, and there'll be a chance for the question and answer session. If you'd like to ask some questions, there are two ways to do so. Later on, when we come to the opportunity to ask, we can come directly to you. If you'd like to register questions throughout, Zoom has an option at the bottom of the screen there to chat. If you click on it, if you're on a computer, it will open up a screen on the right-hand side. At the bottom, if you type your question in there, we can see what your question is, and then I can either ask the question later on, or I can put it, or Chris can read it from the screen as well a little bit later on. We're expecting the session today to run between about 45 minutes and an hour. And if we're good to go now, I'm hoping that Chris is there. I'm going to hand you over directly for Chris to kick off. Chris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Okay, right. So today what I wanted to do is give you a general update really on the safety guidelines that came out, the much anticipated safety guidelines that came out from the government on Tuesday. There's 8 guidelines for different sectors of work. What I want to do is run through the general guidelines that they say. There's a common thread through all of them as well. So I've picked out the main parts from it, and then, as Simon said afterwards, then we'll be open to questions, but hopefully I'm going to cover the main parts anyway, but there might be some other bits that are specific to your business. So firstly, I'd like to go through some general points, which is the main message from the safety guidelines is still to stay at home and work from home if you can. If that's been working for a company already, and I know many companies that are running their whole business from home, then try and keep it at that for now, as long as we can really. So if it's a more internet-based company, they need to be staying at home. Now, a lot of companies are having to go back into the workplace and physically have to have people in the workplace, which is where these safety guidelines have come into effect. So as we all know, employees have a duty of care to their employees to make sure that they safeguard their employees at all times. So different measures have got to put in place to safeguard employees if they cannot work at home. Employees, once these have been put in place, employees then have a duty to do what is asked of them, to abide by what they have put in place. Now, it's really important that to start with, in this whole process, a risk assessment is carried out. Now, as you know, companies with four or less employees don't have to have a written risk assessment. But whether you've got 1, 2, 30, 50 employees, you still have to carry out a risk assessment. It's just that if you've got 4 or less, it doesn't have to be written down. So the same procedures have to be completed no matter what size the company is. Myself, I've got 2 employees, so I'll put in measures in place to protect us when we all of us come back to the office. Because there's only 3, I don't need to have them written down, but I will do anyway. So it's really important that they do, and they have to go alongside any written procedures that you have in place that are bullet pointed down. Now, they could be different processes that you are going to put in place. Now, they can be emailed out to your clients, they can be in poster form, they can be in notices, and it's just about really making your employees aware of what you're doing and being as clear as possible about what you're doing and putting them at ease, really. Because at the moment, everyone is quite anxious about what's going on, and it's about having things in place and putting them at ease, really. Although you can't give them a hug, you can give them a virtual hug, really. So the next thing is communication. So in this whole process, I think companies have started maybe to communicate more as well. I know it's over different platforms like this. It might be telephone calls as well, but you might find that you're actually keeping in touch with your staff more than you would do if you were face-to-face with them. That needs to carry on, whether people are coming to work, into the workplace, or if they're staying at home. Communication is key, really, for keeping in touch with people, keeping them up to date with what you're putting in place, making sure their well-being as well. A lot of people are on their own at the moment, at home, so their mental health is a big part of this as well. So keep that going with whether people are coming back to the workplace or whether they are staying at home. Keep communicating with them. It is vitally important that we keep doing that. We need to look after the most vulnerable people as well. So if you are thinking of people coming back into the workplace, we need to be looking at if they have any health conditions that could be affected. They could be pregnant. Anybody that's vulnerable, do you really need them back in your workplace at the moment, or can they stay at home and carry on as they have been doing, remotely working, or can they stay on furlough? Because what we've got to try and do is keep these higher risk vulnerable groups as safe as possible and reduce the risk of any infection to them to an absolute minimum. So that's, I think, is vitally important at the moment. Companies need to also, I'm sure they've already had this anyway, and they've already done something about this, but the government says if you're showing any signs, any symptoms whatsoever of COVID-19, you must stay at home, and that stays in place. You must self-isolate for at least 14 days. If you're living with people, 7 days if you're on your own. What you can do, if you or your family members think you're showing signs, you can request a test. If you request the test, make sure you stay at home until you've had the results through. But if it comes back clear that anybody you think is suspected of having symptoms of COVID, if it comes back as clear, they can carry on as normal. But the test is really, really important to know if you've had it or if you haven't. So up until then, it's the self-isolating. Now, what we have to keep in mind also is that it can take between 2 and 10 days before you show any symptoms as well with this virus. So, and it has been known to take up to 24 days as well. So we have to be really careful with who we have contact in that time, which is why they are saying about distancing, the 2-metre rule, keeping that at all times as much as you can in the workplace and when you're out of the home. Keep that distance, regularly wash your hands when you're doing anything really. This puts me on to my next point actually. When you go into your office building, make sure that when you leave your car, you wash your hands, or you have your hand sanitizer to clean your hands before you enter the building. Once you've entered the building, when you go into the office, use it again on your hands. Anytime really you're moving around and touching things, you really need to be keeping your hands clean as much as possible. So that's any toilet facilities, the kitchen area within the building as well. Wash your hands before, wash your hands afterwards, and make sure that you don't touch your face, because the way it's transmitted is through droplets. So whether you're face to face with somebody, whether they sneeze, whether they cough, whether they've taken or touched something that you touch, and it all comes to your face. So if you can keep your hands away from your face until you've thoroughly washed your hands, if you need to, then that's what we need to do. And posters need to be up around that at work, reminding people that to wash hands as often as you can when you're touching things, when you're leaving the office, when you're entering the office again, to not touch your face at all, because that is how it's transmitted, and we need to keep that in people's minds. The government is also saying not to wear PPE, not to wear face masks if you're not in the care sector. I think because I've just seen sort of one of the people that's in with a face mask on. What they're trying to do with that is, because if you haven't got a face covering on, you're more likely to keep the 2 metre distance. If you have got a face mask on, you're more likely to encroach that 2 metre distance, because it gives you that sense of protection, which I can see where the government's going with this as well, because they're trying to save the PPE for the care sector as well. So, because if everybody went out and bought PPE, then there'd be a massive shortage. If you're not wearing it, you're more likely to keep the distance. You're more likely to wash your hands. They're more likely to stick by what they're saying as well. And we've also got the problem of face fit testing. Is the mask suitable? Is it the right specification? Is it fitted to your face properly? Because if it's not, it's pointless wearing it. So I deal with a lot of companies in the construction industry and different other industries where I do face fit testing for them. And if it's not fitted correctly, then it's not going to be doing the job it's meant to. If it's not the right one for the size of the droplets that can infect you with this pandemic, then it's not going to be doing you any good at all if you're in close contact with people. So the government's on about face coverings in public if you are in close contact with people. They're saying about wearing, making your own, wearing a t-shirt, wearing a scarf or something like that. That is if you're in general in the public and you could be within 2 metres of each other. That is not basically PPE, because they're trying to cut down on that as much as possible. But where you can, self-distance. I've said about the 2 metre and the transmission between and being affected by it as well. So what we need to do is keep down the number of contacts you have in a day as well in the workplace. So minimise that as much as you can. The less people you see in the workplace, the less people you are that you're coming into contact with. So that's absolutely vital at the moment. If you can't keep 2 metres apart, we need to work side by side or back to back if possible, and it's only short periods that you want to be doing this. Ideally, it's the 2 metres, staying apart, and if you can't do that, side to side or back to back. If you do need face-to-face working, what the company has to do is work out if they actually do need, if it's vital to have that piece of work done at that time. Can we refrain from doing any face-to-face work within 2 metres? Is there something else we can do? If not, then we might have to put barriers up in place, screens up in place, something to protect. But wherever possible, keep the 2 metres. If you can't, work side by side for short periods or back to back. I've said about putting posters up, literature up for keeping people aware of what they need to have in place. You can have toolbox talks as well with the safety procedures that you've got. Make sure people understand what is in the risk assessment, what is in the toolbox talks you're giving them, what is in the information you give them. A good way of doing this is to either email it out first to them so they've got an idea of what it is before they come back to work, to ask them to read it and then to sign it, but they need to be signing it to say they understand what the processes are, because what a company has to do is then follow that through. If they see people doing something that they shouldn't be doing, if they see people entering areas of the building where they can't get 2 meters and they've been told not to, or they've been advised not to, then the company's then got to act on that. Procedures have got to be followed, because it's really, really important that everyone is following them at the same time, to keep everyone safe on site and in the office. Change the layout of the offices as well if you need to, because if it means you can't work the 2 meters, you might have to change the layout. If you haven't got everybody coming into the office and into the building anyway, it might mean that you've be able to clear up some space for it. It might be that you have to configure your office a bit different to what it usually is. So for instance, my office, when Megan comes back to work for me, the printer and everything's going to be on her side of the office. We can maintain that 2 meter distance, and everything that she's using is going to be on her side, because I'm able to do that for her. So if companies can do that and change the layout as much as possible, that's what we want, really. It can be the same in workshops. It can be the same in warehouses as well. You can use screens, you can use floor markings, you can use barriers to show that you have that distance, or you have that protection between you. So it's really important that companies really think about how they are going to manage the risks and how they are going to reduce the risks before anybody comes back to work. So it's a case of management really sitting down and talking through this, but also getting the views for the employees as well. What would make their job easier in this time to do that. It says in the guidelines as well, in a cover about hot desking. So we need to try and refrain from hot desking as well, it's become really popular in the last few years. Really, desk needs to be designated to an individual as much as possible. They are then in charge of that space for cleaning it, keeping it tidy, and it's not being used by various people. Multiple use telephones as well really should be kept out of the way as well. Use mobiles if you can, personal mobiles, or designate somebody to answer the phones as much as possible. So anything that you are touching frequently, or you're used to touch frequently with many people, needs to be kept to a minimum now as well. Try not to share any items of stationery, pens, different things like that as well, because again, you're touching it and then you're going to be passing it on to somebody else. So it's really important that we look at that sort of thing as well. When we're entering the building, when companies are starting the day and finishing the day, we need to be trying, depending on the amount of staff you have, of staggering the times as well. Staggering start times. I know a lot of construction companies are staggering them for the different professions that are coming onto site. They are also extending hours now, certain companies, so they're working beyond their normal times. So a lot of construction companies now are going to be open until about 9 o'clock at night. It can be the same with offices as well. You can extend your times out to make that change in the rota, to make that change in the start times and the finish times for people, to keep people's interaction and distancing as much as possible. If you can, I've mentioned before about keeping the same 2 people working together. If you're in a warehouse, if you're in a factory or something, keep people together, the same people. It's the same when, I'm going to cover this later on about driving for work, but try and keep the same people. If you're having to share a vehicle, keep the same people in the vehicle so it's not multiple people each day. So try and keep it. So a lot of construction companies have got that as well when they're sharing the driving or sharing the vehicle, that they have the same people in the vehicles each day and they're not swapping and changing about, because it's keeping that contact. So yeah, keeping the same people, keeping it to a minimum, absolute minimum. Another thing you can do in the buildings as well is one-way system. So if the building's big enough, it might be that you can do a one-way system through the building. So if the corridors aren't wide enough for when people are passing through, that you can direct people with signs of which way they're going. Another one is, an idea is the lifts as well. Have the lifts. So if they're not big enough to have the 2 metre distance in the lift and you have markings out there, then you can have the lift for people going up into the building, and then people coming down the stairs out of the building use the stairs instead of the lift. That's what some companies are looking at, those sort of procedures, but it's down to the individual offices and how big they are to do that. And I know the government have done some guidance and measurements and proper diagrams on the flooring and what the size you can have for flooring and distancing and everything like that. I know they are available now. When it comes to the building as well, depends if it's a managed workspace or if it's your own offices. Cleaning is really important as well, so having a good cleaning regime in place. And this is for your workspaces, so your desktops, the door handles, common touch points in the building. So a lot of companies now are having the doors open if they're not major fire doors. So they're in internal doors, leaving them open so you're not touching the handles. The touch points going into the buildings as well, keeping them regularly cleaned or having it completely so it's remoteless. So you go into the building without touching anything. If you have disposable gloves when cleaning, you can use those. If you don't have disposable gloves, it's okay because you can clean and then you can wash your hands afterwards, just don't touch your face. But it's really important that we keep the cleaning up as much as possible with your normal cleaning products or your antibacterial sprays. Use tissues, throw the tissues away straight in the bin, and then they go out as waste, generally as waste. So any communal areas in the building as well, make sure that you wash your hands before you use anything. As I've already covered, you wash your hands afterwards with soap and water is absolutely fine. With antibacterial hand wash as well, absolutely brilliant if you've got that. Hand dryers, they're suggesting turn the hand dryers off so they're not used, so disconnect them so they can't be used and use tissue to dry your hands instead of using hand dryers until they give guidance on whether hand dryers are safe or not to use. But it's just one of them things that cuts down on airborne particles once you've washed your hands, once you're in the area. We need to minimise the movements around your building as well. So if possible, take your breaks outside, have a walk round outside within the building. Cut down on use of kitchen areas if you can. So take a packed lunch with you, take a flask with you for your drinks. So you're minimising your walking around in the building. Take your breaks as you normally would, but go for a walk outside if you can. You still need your exercise, you still need your breaks while at work, but try and take them outside around the building, away from anybody else as well. And cut down your trips throughout the day as well. So I would try and have your employees refrain from going to the shops for anything to eat, bring things with them from home rather than taking multiple trips out in the day, because it cuts down on your interaction with people outside of your workplace and outside of your home. Meetings, try and minimise those face-to-face at work. Try and have it so you're doing these online communications as well, or by phone. If you do have meeting rooms and you do have to have meetings at work, then it's about the social distancing, keeping that distance apart as much as possible. Have the markings in the rooms to make sure people are doing that as well, and sticking by the 2 metre rule and keeping that distance at all times. Visitors to the building, try and keep them to a minimum. If you can do it like this and communicate online or by phone, then brilliant. Minimise the number of people that are coming into the building. Can you see them outside? Do they actually need to come into your workplace? If they do, they need to abide by what procedures and what rules you have in place for social distancing. It's really important that anybody organised visitors coming to the building know what procedures to follow once they're there, and where to go and what to do once they are actually in your building. Ventilating the building is really important, your offices as well. If it's If it's not really cold outside, the ideal thing is to have your windows open as well. Keep some ventilation in there. The government have advised if you've got air conditioning, have it on max flow, the air conditioning system as well. Hopefully your air conditioning system should be all up to date. It should be checked on a yearly basis. It should be maintained. If it hasn't been, it might be a good idea before you open the office up to have a company come in and do their yearly inspection on the air conditioning equipment to make sure it is safe and it is sound to use. But those should be carried out as part of your statutory inspections each year anyway. As I say, have the windows open, have it ventilated as much as you can to keep that airflow going. So when it comes to travelling to work, the government has advised if we can avoid public transport as much as possible. It is really difficult at this moment to avoid that if it's too far to walk, if you haven't got a bike, you can't cycle, if you don't drive to work, you don't drive yourself, I should say, and you need to use public transport, it's really difficult at the moment. What I would say is they have advised to use a face covering, so cover yourself with a scarf, with a homemade one. If you do have a mask, then wear a mask with it on. Keep your distance at all times as much as possible, and don't interact with people when you're in the queue for the transport. Keep side to side with them. Keep the 2 metre distance from it. Wait till it's your time to go on the bus. Unfortunately, we can't regulate for people not doing that and pushing in next to you, but as much as you can, try and keep that distance at all times. And if you have got a face covering to wear when you're on public transport, then that would be when you do wear it. When it comes to driving your vehicle as well, as I've already said, try and keep it to the same people if you are sharing a vehicle. If you can drive on your own, drive on your own. If you do have to share a vehicle with somebody, ideally it's a large vehicle. Ideally it's only 2 people, and you can have the driver and you can have somebody in the, I would say, the back seat on the opposite corner. So there's no chance of you being in the passenger side, you looking across at the driver talking to him, because then you're the face-to-face bit that we are trying to minimise as much as possible. Have the windows open when you go in the vehicle. Ask the people to wash their hands before they get in the vehicle. When you leave the vehicle, again, wash your hands after you've entered the building. If you carry the hand wash with you, wash your hands before you go in the building like that, if you've got the individual ones. As much as possible, keep contact in that vehicle down to a minimum. As I say, have the windows open as well to ventilate it. And then the person whose vehicle it is, keep it regularly cleaned, wipe it down as much as possible after it's been used. And then hopefully that will safeguard people that do have to share a vehicle to work. When it comes to cleaning vehicles, the handles need to be done. Anything that's touched really needs to be wiped down, needs to be clean. And this will be ongoing until we get told not to do it, advised not to do it. So it's good to get in that regime of keeping your car clean as much as possible. Another one is plant. So if we are sharing some warehouses, if you have plant that is regularly used, try and have 1 operator per piece of plant. And again, that is then cleaned down after use, each time it's used when it's left unattended. But one person per plant. If it's a shift and you've got different people coming in on shifts, then the equipment needs to be cleaned down thoroughly before the next people come and use it. Then it'd be a good idea for them to clean it before they use it as well, to make sure it's been done properly. But ideally, it needs to be one bit of equipment per person that's using it, and just being sensible on the cleaning and do it as much as possible. When it comes to working in other people's premises, so going into carry out maintenance or any sort of building or installation or anything. As I said in one of my previous things, it's communicating with the occupants of the premises before you get there. What arrangements are you going to have in place with them? Are they in the vulnerable sector? Because it makes it more difficult to work in their house if they are. So communication is absolutely key. Keeping that social distance at all times. If they can keep the doors open for you, keep the doors open for you so you're not touching anything, and work in a separate room to them. But making arrangements with that person, with the client first before you go, to advise them on everything that you need to have in place before you get there is absolute paramount, before you get to site, before you get to the premises. So I think I said this at the start, that people need to really take responsibility of this as well. It's not just down to the employers, it's down to every individual, from the top down, from the bottom up, no matter what size the company is. And everyone needs to really take this on board and take it very seriously as well, because it's not going away for a long, long time. These are measures that I think will evolve as time goes on. I think things will change, advice will change. These are the main core areas that companies need to look out for, and everybody needs to really take responsibility of this. And it's about the employers making sure that everybody does take this on board when people do come back to work, because it's everybody's responsibility. One of the two main things I would say before I finish is make sure you keep that social distance as much as possible when you're at work. Make sure that stays in place, and make sure that you regularly wash your hands, you don't touch your face, and everyone stays safe out there. So that's the end of my presentation at the moment. So I'm ready for any questions if anybody wants to ask any.
Okay, thanks, Chris. That's fantastic in terms of the amount of information that you've passed on to us there, and the range of things that you've gone through. We've got a couple of questions that are in the chat forum at the moment, and if anybody else would like to pose a question, could I just get you to put the question or a summary of it in there, and we'll come to you and you can ask your question directly. There are a couple there at the moment which I'll go to straight away. But I've also got some that have been sent in to us beforehand as well. So the first one, I'm going to go over to Tony Cox if I could. And Tony, I'm just going to unmute you in a second, so be ready. This is about wearing face masks for various situations. So Tony, do you mind just replaying your question to us, please?
Yeah, it's just a response to the fact that I've got a face mask on.
Yeah.
I've been delivering to the vulnerable today, so
Okay.
I'm going to wear one, whether the government tell me to wear one or not, for their protection. And as someone that's now going to and from my own business, I'm taking one or wearing one in the car in case I get a chance encounter, such as I have to render first aid to someone or help someone out. A guy fell off his bike the other day in front of me, and I stopped and helped him up. So my view is that we should have them carry them for chance encounters as well as pre-planned work situations. Would you agree with that?
I think it's really difficult because I think at the moment there is a massive shortage of face protection in the country. It's taken people quite a long time to get masks through, because I've been speaking to quite a few people about this. If possible, I mean, where you can, wearing one in your own vehicle when you're on your own, I don't think is necessary. In the guidelines, the safety guidelines that they've sent through, it actually says what to do in an emergency situation. And in an emergency situation, they're saying that they understand that if you're not wearing a face mask, that you will still carry out your duty if there is an emergency without holding that 2 metre distance. Now, the problem is with wearing the face mask, it's got to be the right face mask out there. There's a lot of people talking about what they're using. I've tried to refrain them from using certain different ones if they are insistent on using it, because they are not suitable for what the purpose is. Because to actually get infected by this, the droplets are very, very tiny. The masks that are suitable for this are FFP3 masks and N95 masks, or FFP2 masks. They'll give you, say, 95% protection from catching this. So, sorry.
Mine's about infecting the other people. So the government guidance I've seen says that to wear a homemade face mask, or even a not an N registered one, is better because you're not infecting other people if you cough or sneeze. I'm visiting the vulnerable. they've not been out of their houses in weeks, so they're not going to affect me. So I'm wearing one to stop myself infecting others. And I know what they're saying about if you're in your car, don't wear one, of course. But if I have a chance to encounter, because I have to meet someone, do something, then I'll put one on, whether it's homemade or otherwise. I think I'm not talking about the medical masks or the surgical masks. I'm talking about your face covering. The government says you can make your own now. You know.
No, it does, absolutely. And I think I covered this on the public transport about face coverings and that. I think because you're dealing with the vulnerable, I think that's different to a normal office environment situation. And I totally understand that you're using one for that, because you are taking samples and taking items to the vulnerable, delivering them to them. And it is about, you're right, it is about protecting them. And I think in that instance, you are right to wear one. But generally in the workplace, I don't think it's a necessity for people to wear them generally in the workplace. I think if you are going to be having contact with the vulnerable, I think you're absolutely right in doing that. And I think that's a specific area that we're covering there. So you are right in doing that, because it is protecting them, because you're being in vicinity of more people than they are. They're not leaving home at the moment. So I think you are right in wearing one for that instance. But generally, I think driving for work and in an office environment, in a workshop environment, in a factory environment, I don't think there'll be any requirement to wear one all the time at all.
The police are issuing them this week. The police are issuing masks this week, yeah. To their officers, yeah.
Right, okay. Well, I think that's different, because they're going to have to be dealing with people face to face that are, and I think there's been instances where they've had people spit in the face as well. And there's a railway worker unfortunately died because people were confronting her right up to their face. And I think, you know, in that instant, a risk assessment needs to be carried out. And I think if it's deemed that it's going to be a risk to people and to their health, of people really getting within the 2 meters face to face, being confrontational, then I think then masks then might be suitable to wear. But in a normal instance, I don't think there's any requirement for that.
No. I think the police should have had them for the last 8 weeks or more, but they just didn't have the supply, like you said. So they've got the supply now, so they're going to issue them. Anyway, sorry about that. I won't plug your time anymore.
No, thank you for that question, Tony. I'm just going to move on to a slightly different tack for the next question. It's from Katie Johnson. So, Katie, if you're ready, I'm going to unmute you in a second. This is about a factory setting where there are various bits of facilities that a multiple range of people will be using. Katie, do you mind just explaining your situation?
Hi, thank you for your time. For us, we are in a factory environment, we're in food, we have 120 people at any one time can be on site. We've obviously been working all the way through the pandemic, and we're looking at our different areas. And I was just picking up on the point you made in relation to canteen facilities and kettles and microwaves and things. So we don't have any hot food sort of canteen areas. What we do is we offer kettles, microwaves, hot drink vending machines. And just picking up on your point, would you suggest we remove these or limit their use?
I think if there's regular cleaning going on, and I think if people are advised to wash their hands before they touch any communal items, such as buttons on microwaves, such as kettles, have signs up there saying wash your hands first, make sure that people are doing that before they use it. I can't see there being a problem with that, because it's all about, is it on your hands, if they touch the face, and then touching the items. But it might be that you have, after everybody has used it, they have some tissue, they have some cleaning spray, and they wipe it down before, after they use it. Or people spray it down into a tissue and wipe it down before they use the actual item themselves. But I think it's really difficult when you've got multiple use to say to everybody, bring your own drinks with you, and that. I think it's going to be really difficult to manage that. So I would say they can carry on using it, but maybe just have the signs up saying that they keep their hands clean before they use anything, and clean the items down first. Have some tissue in there, have some antibacterial spray, and then spray those items down and clean them before they're used.
Okay. No, that's great. Thank you. That's what we're doing, but I just wanted to check. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thanks, Katie. There's a similar sort of question from Dawn Fear. Dawn, I'm just going to unmute you just to make sure that's covered all the question that you put there. Dawn, can you hear me?
Cool.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for the info, Chris. It's a similar kind of question. So on the basis that a lot of people went into work one day and then got a call to say do not go in the next, things like water boilers and water coolers that are used every day will have potentially been sat there for 6-7 weeks and potentially longer, because some businesses haven't gone back yet. As someone going in and working in an office, is it safe for me to just use the water heater or the water cooler, or is the employer responsible for doing something, or do I need to do something?
Right, yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So, yeah, the problem with water systems in the building, as many of you may know or may not know, is Legionella. So let's just say that no precautions were taken before there was lockdown. Nobody thought about it, and nobody thought about the water systems. So it's really important that if you have regular maintenance checks on the systems and you have somebody to do it, maybe call them to get them to come and check the systems beforehand. If you're on a regular maintenance schedule with them, check all the systems out. They can sort it all out for you before anybody actually starts to work in the building. If you haven't on that, we'll start with the cold water system. So what I would suggest is any taps, cold water taps that you've got, set them on so they're running before, this is as people get into the building. So have the windows open, set the water on running, flush the toilets as much as possible, and then let that run through for 10 minutes before, to make sure that system is clear through. I would say with the water tanks, any hot water tanks you have in there, we need to be really getting some testing done, because that water's sat in those tanks and in that system without being used for best part of 4 to 6 weeks. So I would say to contact a specialist in that area to come out and do some checks of the tanks before any of that water system's used. If the showers are on that water system, they are not to be used at all until those checks have been made out on those tanks and you've had the all clear with it. Electric showers are different. So electric showers, open the windows if you can, set the temperature on the shower to hot and let it run for 10 minutes to run that through, because it will be in the head and it will be in the actual shower cord itself. Another thing just thought about is water boilers. So if you've got a water boiler that has been turned off or that's been on, what you want to do is wait for it to boil, then run a lot of water off, wait for it to fill up again, wait for it to boil again, and then it should be okay to use. If you've got, most people do their own internal checks, so they'll have a thermometer so they can check the water temperature. The Legionella bacteria grows between 20 and 45 degrees. So anything below 20, it's dormant. Anything above really 60, it can't survive. So if we've got a water boiler that's running at boiling temperature, it should be okay when it's up and it's run through. You should be okay to use that. The last thing really regarding water systems is that I can think about is if you've got a water chiller. So if you're on the bottles with the water chiller, I would get rid of the bottle that's in there that's the seal's been broken on. You might be under a maintenance contract with them, so it might be a good idea to give them a call again before people come into the office to come and do that and clean it all out. You can do it yourself, so you get some sterilising liquid or sterilising tablets, sterilise the actual mechanisms and everything yourself, put the new container on once that's all done, run it through, and then that should be good to use as well. But regarding the systems and water systems, as I say, if you've got any water tanks with water that's been sat in there, they need to be tested really properly by a competent person before you are using any of those. I hope I've answered your questions there.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Chris. A related question that had been sent in earlier to that is, what happens if we need to bring in an engineer to the facility to maybe fix a piece of plant, or is the water cooler engineer that's coming to test the water cooler or to look at the water system itself? What precautions should we as an organisation put in place to make sure that that's as safe as possible?
Well, again, it's just making sure that that contact is kept to a minimum. So if we can do any checks, any plant equipment checks before people start back to work, that is absolutely ideal. Communicate how you want that to happen beforehand and give them space to do it. So make sure that they can enter the building from a certain way. They can go straight to the work area. They can have the 2 metre distance around them. Nobody needs to be in their work area when they're doing it. You can have a schedule of works from them, so you know exactly in the building where the equipment is that they need to maintain or need to look at, so you can zone it off. You zone off those areas, find out how long it's going to take them, and then zone it off when they need to be. The best time is when the building's empty, especially if you're looking at the water system. So make sure the building's empty, and then they can go where they want then. And as long as they are practicing the cleanliness, hand washing, cleaning down everything and that, there shouldn't be a problem with it at all, really. When it comes to plant, if you've got somebody, so say, for instance, I'll use a forklift truck as an example. If somebody's got a forklift truck that needs some maintenance on it, the forklift truck can be driven to an area within the building or outside if it's fine. The truck can be cleaned down. So all the controls and everything are cleaned as much as possible. Then the engineer can go and do any work on the truck that they need to. You can leave cleaning products for them if they want to clean it down as well, before and after they've done any work with it. It's all about just working with the different companies and communicating with them what they need access to, how much space they need, and then it needs to be worked out between the two companies of how safely to do that.
That's great. I've got a few more questions that have been sent in before, but just a reminder, if anybody on the call at the moment, there's 10 minutes to go in terms of this particular webinar. If you've got any questions that you want to put directly to Chris, if you just put them in the chat box so far, we'll try and get round to them. If we don't, we'll make sure that we come out to you and answer them afterwards. But just to make you aware, probably nine minutes now to go in terms of just putting some of your own questions to Chris. The next question I've got is, in an office where there's multiple tenants, so probably a managed workspace, there's a number of questions, I suppose, that come up out of that. One of which is about staggering the return to work of the office, potentially. But it's also about responsibilities for the landlord, but also the occupiers of the building as well. Have you got some clarity in terms of who should be looking after what in the building, especially if the tenants that are in the building may have just a couple of employees, so probably won't have written policies or written risk assessments?
Yeah, well, the building is, whoever's in charge of the building is in charge of cleaning of the building, let's say, of the general areas, the kitchen areas, the toilets and everything like that. And the tenants are in charge of their own space themselves. I think what will be a good idea is, if you can, I mean, it's difficult to stagger times with people because I know people travel throughout the day to and from the offices. So I think that'll be really difficult to do in that respect, unless you've only got a few occupants in the actual building itself. If you've got multiple, I think that'll be really difficult to do. I think what needs to be outside is maybe some signage, maybe some distancing markings around the place, and sending out emails to management of each of those offices stating what you are implementing as the people that are running the building. So they need to inform you if there's any specific times and that they want to be in, or you tell them exactly what your rules will be. So when they arrive, if they see people entering the building, make sure they stay back 2 metres before they enter in the building themselves. The general areas will be, as I say, you'll be in charge of cleaning those and making sure those clean. That might be once a day with cleaners. And then it's about informing the tenants that they need to keep their areas clean. And like Katie said earlier on with her point about keeping communal areas clean as well. So it might be that you send a thing out to say, can you please wipe down the kettle after you've used it, before you've used it, wash your hands before and afterwards as well. And then making sure that that's been monitored, on an ongoing basis with it really. So the tenants are in charge of their bits themselves. The building owners are in charge of their bits. But it's just about communicating. And if they've only got 2 employees and they're not really au fait with health and safety regulations, anything, it might be a case of you providing them with some procedures if you can, as much as possible, as much information as you can.
Okay. I've just seen another question pop up from William in the chat. So William Tree, I'm just going to open your mic in a second. William, would you like to put your question directly to Chris?
Yeah, hi there, Chris. We've got various employees that have been on furlough leave, and obviously they're potentially imminently returning to work. Do you think as a employer we have a duty of care to complete a return to work interview or assessment as part of that process?
It depends on what work they're going to be carrying out, really. I think what you can do is send them all the information you've got. So have your risk assessments in place ready. Have your safe working procedures ready as much as you can. As I've said before in my when I did the presentation, try and get their views as well on what they. So if you give your procedures, ask for views back on it. What do you think to this? Would anything else work for you? And do that. And I think what you can do that remotely. You can do that over the phone. I think having like an induction back might be a good idea, but it's got to be at a distance as well. So it's going to be difficult depending on how many employees you've got to do that really. I think by doing it remotely, you can get people's feedback without having that face-to-face contact. And then it might be that when you get back to work, you can individually speak to them. Maybe they can come into a room. I don't know the best way of doing it, but then you can do it. But there's no real need to do that. As I said, any procedures or any toolbox talks or anything, it's a good idea to get them to agree to them and sign them. Now that could be via an email response back saying yes, they understand it, but it's making sure that they do read it and they do understand it, because the problem is a lot of people, when it comes to health and safety, they might skim read it, but it's making sure that they do understand that everything is, all the processes that they have in place, and that they will follow them as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay.
That's brilliant. I've just got one quick question that follows up from a point that you made earlier, Chris, in terms of undertaking a risk assessment. Yeah, if it's a small business that's listening at the moment that don't necessarily have access to health and safety, HR support, a dedicated point, is there a way of getting a template that they can use at this time? Is there a best practice or a source of information that they could go to get something that'd be really helpful? Yeah,
they can actually. Yeah, I mean, there's various consultants out there like myself that companies do use. But if you're only 1 or 2 employees, the HSE have got templates on their website that you can use. They are free to use. What I would say is just be careful if you are doing a small company, you are doing your risk assessments yourself, you follow the guidelines from the HSE, follow all the information they've got, and make sure that they are robust as possible. As I say, with only less than 4 employees, you don't have to have a written risk assessment in place. You can get the guidance off the HSE's website to put those procedures in place. As I say, they do have a template for writing their own as well, but there are consultants out there and health and safety professionals that if you wanted to outsource that, that they will have templates and everything available for you, so you don't have to do it yourselves.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. So we've nearly got to 3 o'clock. An hour's just absolutely whizzed by. So
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you, Chris. I noticed there are still a couple of questions in the chat box, and what we will do with those, we'll respond directly to you on the pieces that you've raised that we haven't been able to cover at this stage. But what I'd like to do now is to thank you all for joining us today. We hope you have found it invaluable and a good use of an hour's time in terms of the information that you'll be able to glean this afternoon. We have got more ChamberConnect series events coming up, so look out for our events that will be flagged up on our website, links-chamber.co.uk/events, or on our social media. The next event that we have got coming up is our new virtual Lincolnshire Construction and Property Network. It's on the 19th of May, 12:30 until 2:30. Again, our website and the events part will tell you a little bit more about that in terms of that networking opportunity. If you've got any email, if you've got any feedback, or if you've got any comments about today, any ideas about what we should be covering in future, events@links-chamber.co.uk is the email address to send things on to, events@links-chamber.co.uk. For now, I'd like to say thank you once more to Chris Owen of Optimum Safety and Security Management. To you all, thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a very productive afternoon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.